All right, hello again, everyone. So we are continuing our talk on climate change and health, looking at it from a youth and gender lens. In this section, we're going to briefly look at how the health impacts are not gender neutral, and how these different groups of people experience climate-related health risks differently. And we're also going to explore the mental health impacts of climate change. First, we're looking at gender and how gender affects climate change and its impact on health. So we know that women and girls are disproportionately affected by climate change as a result of social, economic, and cultural equities, which limit their access to information, limit their mobility, and their decision making. Research has also shown that in the youth 16 to 25-year-old age group, 4 in 10 participants are hesitant to have children as a result of climate change. What happens when women particularly are exposed to climate change or exposed to the extreme weather events? So we're looking at a range of those impacts that we looked at with the physical health impacts. So exposure to heat, air pollution, food insecurity, vector-borne diseases can all affect reproductive and maternal health. There is early evidence to show that exposure to extreme heat affects our pregnancy outcomes. So it can lead to miscarriages, it can lead to early births or low birth weight infants. We know that one of the direct health impacts of climate change is food insecurity, and that can lead to malnutrition if pregnant women do not have access to nutritious food, and that is going to affect pregnancy outcomes as well. And then, of course, if you're unable to access healthcare, it's going to increase the conditions that women can experience during pregnancy, and it can increase death rates as well. Moving on to climate change and mental health, specifically looking at mental health affecting the youth. There are a few terms that are becoming more common now that help to describe how some people feel about climate change. So we have climate anxiety, which is where people experience feelings of anxiety or worry related to climate change. Now, it's important to know here that having climate anxiety is not a mental illness, it is not a mental disorder. It simply means that you are concerned and you get scared and worried about climate change, and it is something, it's okay to feel that way. There's also solastalgia, which is actually distress that somebody might feel as a result of the environmental change that people see that is directly connected to their home environment. So if you see your home environment changing, or maybe it is actually destroyed as a result of a climate event, you might experience that level of distress. And then there's climate grief, where you mourn the loss of your ecosystem, of your green landscapes, of your regular ways of life as a result of the impacts of climate change. And all of these things, it's okay to feel this way, and it's okay to express these feelings because there are many people who feel this way. One study was done in 2021, and in this study, it looked at climate anxiety amongst children and young people, again, 16 to 25-year age group. And this study was done in 10 countries. None of the countries involved were from the Caribbean, but it was a large number, 10,000 children and young people. And this study found that, you know, children and young people across all of the 10 countries were worried about climate change. Almost 60% very or extremely worried, and 84% at least moderately worried. We also found that almost half or more than half of the participants had a range of emotions from feeling sad, from angry, powerless to guilty. And that more than 45% of children and young people felt that climate change was negatively impacting their daily life and how they were functioning. And then finally, children and young people reported a high number of negative thoughts about climate change, with 75% saying that they think the future is frightening, and 83% saying that they think people have failed to take care of the planet. So lots of people around the world are experiencing these emotions. And many of you in this audience might be feeling this way as well. And so it's important to know that, you know, you are not alone. But we don't have to let it stop us. Hopefully we can use these emotions to take action. So climate change can affect our mental health in different ways. So there are actually the direct effects which come from experiencing the impact of climate change firsthand, experiencing that hurricane, that severe flooding event, or exposure to extreme heat. There can also be an indirect effect, right, coming from that awareness of what the climate crisis is causing. So if you're watching the news and you're seeing all of these events on TV, or you're watching on social media and you're seeing lots of images and videos and posts about climate change, right? Or if you yourself are just, you know, you're worried about your own future and the future of the planet, that can stir up emotions within you. Some research has been done in this area, and it has been found that after an extreme weather event like a hurricane or a heat wave, mental health problems can outnumber the physical health problems by 40 to 1. And some of those common mental health impacts include anxiety and fear and depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. So it is important to again remember that there are all of these different emotions that we're going to experience along the way. And we want to find a way to be able to channel that energy into something more positive. Now, I found this schematic from another article. And in this schematic, it really outlines what climate change does and how it can impact physical and mental health. So what we're seeing here is that when we have the increased global temperatures and we have an increase in the frequency and severity of extreme weather events, we have our direct impacts. We have loss of life, we have injury to our cells, damage to infrastructure, damage to the agricultural land, which is going to disrupt our food supply, disrupt our health systems, affect people's livelihoods, worsen our physical health, and it can even lead to migration, right? You have the indirect impacts where people are witnessing the changes in their environment and they're becoming more aware of these extreme weather events and how they can impact us. And then these in turn then start to impact our mental health, where you can actually have the direct impacts like suicide. So there are research now showing that exposure to extreme heat actually increases suicide rates. You have post-traumatic stress disorder, you have anxiety and depression. And then we have the indirect impacts, which we mentioned when we look at the definitions, where you're having climate anxiety, solastalgia, and climate grief. Now, with all of these emotions, sometimes, you know, we may not always know exactly what we're feeling. And so this climate emotions wheel was developed as a tool to help us identify and bring awareness to our own emotions so that we'll be able to cope with them. And it is important to remember that whatever feeling you're having, it's okay to have that feeling. Being able to put a name to it helps you to really acknowledge it and validate it. Lots of people feel this way. Sometimes we feel like we might be the only ones feeling this way. But what we are seeing is that more and more people are actually feeling this way. So this climate tool puts our emotions into four broad categories. Some of us might feel positive because we want to take action. Some of us might feel fear, we might feel scared. Some of us might be upset and angry, and some of us might be sad. And even in those broad categories, there's a spectrum within each of those where our emotions might lie. So you can utilize this tool for yourselves, for your friends, just to sort of pinpoint where you might be on the spectrum and maybe think about where you want to move to be. It's important to remember that, while this might be very challenging, it might be emotional, there are also opportunities for us to do things. So as young people, there are lots of opportunities for us to do things to create a healthier planet. Small actions can lead to big reactions. So creating our green and blue spaces, our nature activities can help us feel calmer, happier, and more connected to our environments. But that in turn helps to lower the greenhouse gas emissions that are contributing to climate change. But we could also think about other avenues in which we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And that tells us that we are doing something, we are actively doing something to improve the planet. And taking care of the planet is a way of taking care of our minds, right? By going out in nature, by taking action, working together with our communities, this actually helps to reduce the psychological distress and the impact of mental health conditions. So that brings us to the end of part 2 of our presentation, focusing a bit on gender and then climate and mental health. And in our next, the final talk, we're going to look at a little bit on the data gaps that exist specifically within the Caribbean region. Again, thank you very much for your